Hello, I'm Todd Spain, joined again by Cid Cardoso, owner of Inside Out Sports and 7-time Ironman Hawaii veteran. Cid, we talked previously about the choice between a time trial bike and a road bike, but one of the other questions that we receive all the time is, how do I make a selection on a road bike, and what's the differences between equipment and price? What do I get for my money? Where should I be looking?
I think the selection of the right bike for you probably starts with determining a price range that you're comfortable with. And I say that because these days you can find great bikes starting at $700, great road bikes starting at $700, and obviously very great bikes at $7,000. But there's going to be there's very functional bikes at all kinds of different price ranges, and there's a ton of options. So the first thing is to narrow that down a little bit and figure out where do you want to be. What are you comfortable spending? And knowing that you may go up a little or come down a little bit depending on what you find, but that's going to give you a starting point. When you think in terms of bikes, even though this is one complete bike, I think it helps to think in terms of probably 4 different parts of the bike. The first one is the frame and fork, which is the skeleton of the bike. That's going to have a huge bearing on how much the complete bike is going to cost. The second one are the components, or the group, which are most of the moving parts, most of the shiny parts that you see on the bike. I mean, it's the cranks and the brakes and the derailleurs and so forth. Third would be the non-moving parts, which would be the handlebars, saddle, and so forth. And fourth would be the wheels. So the combination of those 4 groups are going to determine on how expensive the bike is going to be. And starting with, and there's kind of 2 ways of looking at it. There are some manufacturers that will make a less expensive frame and equipped with higher-end parts. And there's other manufacturers which start with what's considered a higher-end frame and then equipped with less expensive parts. And how you combine those things is going to determine the final product. And there's a couple of ways of looking at it. Generally speaking, because the frame is so important and because it's the most difficult part to upgrade, most people tend to think of the frame as the most important thing. So you're going to look at something that, and what's going to determine how costly or how well one performs are things like tube shape, for example. Mm-hmm. More aerodynamic tube shape means that the bike is generally going to be faster. Now, a more aerodynamic tube shape is more difficult to make or to manufacture than a round tube shape is. So something like this can increase the cost of the bike. Whether the cables are internally routed or externally routed. Small aerodynamic difference there. How stiff the frame is laterally. A laterally stiffer frame means that there's going to be less energy loss during the pedal stroke. It means that the bike is going to accelerate faster. And there's also the material that the frame is made with. Generally, exotic materials like carbon or titanium, for that matter, tend to be a little bit more expensive than aluminum ones will. But generally speaking, the more the frame costs, the lighter it's going to be, the more aerodynamic it's going to be. And theoretically, the laterally stiffer it's going to be. So again, for a high-performance rider, for somebody who's doing 100-mile Ironman rides, they may have one specific need. For somebody who's doing a recreational 25-mile ride, the aerodynamic properties of that frame may not be as important. In terms of components, it's the same way. Shimano, SRAM, Campy, they all have several different levels of components. And what you get as you go up in price is generally better machinery. It means that the components are going to be lighter, they're going to look a little bit nicer, and they may last a little bit longer. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to work better out of the box. So in a lot of cases, you can get a $1,000 bike and a $2,000 bike, and if you didn't know which was which, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But again, depending on how many miles you're going to put on the bike, that should help determine the level of components you're going to buy. And as far as wheels is again dependent on what your goals are. If your goals are to climb mountains, then you want the lightest set of wheels as possible. And as I mentioned before in cycling, you pay for less weight. If your goal is just to ride around the neighborhood, or if your goal is to ride on rough roads, you may look for something that's going to be a little bit heavier, but also a little bit sturdier. And how you combine those parts is going to determine the price of the bike. But if you have a price in mind, and if you go to a reputable bike shop, they will be able to help you find something. And finally, it's the fit. Most bike manufacturers make frames in several different sizes. Most of them are going to have at least a small, medium, large, extra large, and so forth, or they'll have numbers, every other number, to determine to signify different sizes of bikes. So it should be relatively easy to find one that fits. But you may find that a particular brand fits better than another for that particular body type. Either somebody's longer torso than shorter legs, or so forth. So it is important to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing and who will take the time to answer your questions and to let you test ride a few different bikes.